Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome again from the King Centre from us here. It's great to gather, it's good to have some familiar faces in the room, but obviously less than we were hoping for today. And next week, looking to gather more people back in, obviously, but we long for that day, and hopefully it won't be too soon before we can do so. I want to start with a question this morning, which is, what comes to your mind when I mention the word mission? I wonder what you think about or how you would define the word mission. Just to get our minds thinking about it a little bit, one definition I came across was this, that mission is a core purpose of an organization or a company. A core purpose, it speaks about the reason for the existence of that organization or the organization or company, or even maybe a person. You might have a personal mission. You might say, this is why I live. This is why I exist. And I did a bit of research on a few mission statements of familiar companies that you would have likely have heard of, saying why they exist. Coca-Cola, for instance. Why do you think Coca-Cola say that they exist? Well, this is it. It is to refresh the world in mind, body, and spirit, to inspire moments of optimism and happiness through our brands and action, to create value and make a difference. I don't know what you think about that as a mission statement for a fizzy drink, but anyway, Disney's is slightly shorter than that, and I think this might be an old one before they started their streaming service, but it's to make people happy. That's their mission. That's their reasons for existence. Google, what do you think Google's mission is, their core purpose of why they exist? It is this, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Okay, fair enough. How would you answer the question, though, about your life? What would you say is the reason for your existence? Why are we here? And why are we here as church? What's the point of church? How would you define the core purpose of the church? Well, this series that we're doing at the minute called Church Is looking at this very question, really. What is the church for? What is the church all about? And I want to focus in on today's sort of title, if you like, for today's talk. Church is a family on a mission. So what is the core purpose of the church? What's the kind of essence of it? Well, I want to take us to Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 28, but maybe not to the place that for some people would have come into their minds, which is right at the end of Matthew 28. I want to take us to the story of Jesus. He's been around 3 years teaching, preaching, gathering followers. Then he's been deserted by his followers, arrested, falsely tried, crucified. And then the verses we're going to read are from Matthew 28, verse 1 to 7. In one sense, he's had the mission, if you like, the purpose of the Romans and the Jewish authorities had been to stop this Jesus movement. And so Jesus has been killed on a cross, dead and buried, put into a borrowed tomb, a stone's been rolled across the tomb, a guard has been placed outside the tomb, and we pick up the story, Matthew 28, verse 1. I'm just going to read sort of 7 verses and focus in on one of them. It says this, Matthew 28. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him, and they became like dead men. And the angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. Well, he's not here. He's risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he was lying." Now, verse 7. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. I want to focus in on that last verse there. Go quickly, tell the disciples he has risen from the dead. Because within these words, in one sense, is the essence of and the core purpose of the mission of the church. And I want to start with the message of the mission. Every kind of mission has a message, what they're trying to communicate to people. And it's interesting when you look through the mission statements of some of the companies that we've read out and other ones as well, they're often wanting to benefit humanity, do something for the good of humanity, do something that is big and great. I mean, Coca-Cola's to refresh the whole world in mind, body, and spirit. That's a huge deal that they're aiming for there, that they say their core purpose is. And I think also that each one of us has a desire to be part of something that is bigger than us and bigger than our lives. I think it's been shown in some studies that it produces a healthiness in us when we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so every mission has a message, often a good news message. It wouldn't be much of a kind of mission if Coca-Cola said our purpose is to get people addicted to sugar. That's not going to really sell their product very well. And so I realize, though, the message of Christianity, that he is risen from the dead, this Jesus who was crucified has been raised, raises questions in our minds. And perhaps if you're tuning in today and you're watching this, you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, maybe never been to church before, you're just looking in, it would raise questions in your mind, and rightly so. But it's an important question. In fact, one atheist who was a professor, Professor Joad, said this. He said, the most important question in the world is, did Jesus rise from the dead? The most important question in the world. I think he gets it. He gets the heart of the resurrection, that if it is true, it changes everything. Now, again, I realize for some you might be thinking, well, I don't even believe Jesus even existed on the planet. Now, majority of historians, it seems, would say, yes, Jesus really did exist. One historian, Geza Vermes, who's not a Christian, but who is an expert on early Christianity, and he affirms that Jesus did exist. He affirms that there was an empty tomb. He affirms that the disciples didn't steal the body. He doesn't come to the same conclusion as the disciples here in the Bible, but he affirms the existence of Jesus. Another historian and scholar, I just want to quote for you, and it should come up on the screen, N.T. Wright. He says this. He says, the early Christians did not invent the empty tomb and the meetings or sightings of the risen Jesus in order to explain a faith that they already had. Nobody was expecting this kind of thing. No kind of conversion experience would have generated such ideas. Nobody would have invented it, no matter how guilty or how forgiven they felt, no matter how many hours they pored over the scriptures, the Bible, the Old Testament. To suggest otherwise is to stop doing history and to enter into a fantasy world of our own. So what if he was raised? What if the resurrection of Jesus is true? What does that mean? What does it matter for our lives? What does it matter for your life, for my life? Well, let me give a few things. One, I think it means his words can be trusted. Jesus seemed to stake everything on the resurrection, on the things that he said. In fact, in verse 28, verse 6, the angel says, just as he said. Jesus had said this thing, that he would be raised from the dead. And you can read that back in Matthew 20, verses 18 to 19, where Jesus says, I'll be condemned, I'll be crucified, and I'll be raised up. So Jesus speaks in advance of his resurrection. And so can his words even be trusted? Jesus makes massive claims about himself. He talks about being the shepherd, the rock. These are images from the Old Testament, the light of the world. These are images of the Old Testament. Jesus says that his very words that he speaks are foundational. They're foundational to our lives. He said, if you build your life on what I say, on my words, all of us build our lives on, it's not what we believe so much as it is who do we believe. It's whose words do we trust? Whose words do we believe? Whose words do we build our lives and shape our lives around? And Jesus says his words are foundational. And if the resurrection is not true, we can't trust anything he says. But if true, then we can build our lives on all that he says. So his words can be trusted. Secondly, his words and his warnings, rather, need to be heeded. Jesus speaks straight. He doesn't sort of skirt around the edges, if you like. He talks about the seriousness of sin. He talks about the seriousness of our lostness and humanity's predicament and our brokenness. He talks about the separation between us and God because of that sin. He talks about the judgment that is to come on the evil in the world. And the evil in the world is there in us, in humans, in our own hearts. And so Jesus lovingly, and rightly so, if you love someone, you warn them. That's what we do when we love someone. And Jesus wonderfully warns us of these things and lovingly warns us. And we need to listen to what he says. So his words can be trusted, his warnings need to be heeded, and his work is effective. Jesus said it back in Matthew 20, verse 28, he said, I've come to give my life as a ransom for many, to give his life in place of, so another can live. And obviously with the whole Remembrance Sunday thing, and I always think about my great-grandfather, Cornelius, in World War I, who died in Passchendaele, and once his giving of a life is enabled us to live in freedom today, as Marcus alluded to at the beginning. This is what happens, and we see it, and Jesus does it on the ultimate level in the giving of his life. The Bible talks about that in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, and I don't know what you think of when you hear that word reconcile, but it means the bringing together of two parties that were divided and warring against each other, if you like. I don't want to get into politics particularly, but imagine if on our screens this afternoon we saw Biden and Trump embracing one another like they were best friends, not just kind of saying we're going to not have nothing to do and not be horrible, whatever, but together. There's a reconciliation between the two. I think we'd probably be maybe shocked by that. Well, on a whole nother scale, God is reconciling the world to himself in Christ. God is bringing us together in relationship with him through the cross. He takes away the separation of our sin and our muck and our filth, and as we are drawn back into that relationship through what Jesus has done. 1 Peter says that we're born into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Born into a living hope because Jesus is alive. See, the resurrection isn't God correcting a failure. Like, Jesus was killed on the cross. Oh no, what are we going to do? Right, better raise him up from the dead. It's not the correcting of a failure. It's the declaration of success of what took place on the cross. That's what the resurrection says. And everything rests on the resurrection. Imagine, I don't know if you've seen the pictures of the pyramids in Egypt. Imagine one of those pyramids inverted, so it's now upside down and the point is coming down. It's like Christianity is that pyramid, rests on the resurrection, comes to the point of the resurrection. Everything else rests upon this. The Apostle Paul says our faith is without substance, that we're to be pitied more than anyone else on the planet, actually, if the resurrection isn't true. If there's no resurrection, there is no good news message. If there's no resurrection, there is no hope. If there's no resurrection, there's no substance to our faith. If there's no resurrection, there's no message, actually, of the mission when it comes to Christianity, and there's certainly no church. And I'd encourage you, if this question of the resurrection, this message of the mission, the core purpose of Christianity, to declare this message, if you've got questions around it, I'd look for yourself. Explore it. I mean, we recommend a couple of books. One is a chap called Andrew Wilson, If God, Then What? This is an excellent book. Help you explore some of those questions that you might have to do with Christianity. And particularly around, if you've got questions around, can you even trust the Bible? And where I'm reading out from today, this excellent book by Peter J. Williams, Can We Trust the Gospels? Superb book. And I think you'll find really, really helpful if you've got questions. So have a look for yourself. It's interesting, we just read out the two Marys. They were invited into the tomb. They're saying, come and see for yourself. Explore it for yourself. But then we come to the core purpose itself. It is the declaring of this message to the world. And we read those verses in verse 7. Go, quickly, tell. Go speaks of momentum, doesn't it? If we say go, we know what that means. If you're on your sofa and someone says go, you know it means get up and do something, movement, go somewhere. And quickly speaks about a sense of urgency of the mission as well. I mean, just imagine if someone this week, today, discovered the cure for COVID-19. Imagine if they did that and then they kept quiet about it. They thought, well, I've got a week off, so I'm going to go and have my week off first and have a bit of a holiday somewhere. And when I get back, then I might send an email saying to someone, we found a cure for COVID-19. What would we think to that? It'd be crazy. Well, the news that Jesus declares for all humanity is to meet our greatest need. And that's why here, this go quickly, tell is important. There's an urgency, there's a momentum to the mission. C.S. Lewis said, Christianity, if false, is of no importance. If the resurrection isn't true, it's of no importance whatsoever. But if it's true, it's of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. When you read Jesus' words, he doesn't leave that as an option for us, that somehow this message is for some and not for others. It's either good news for the whole world, and that's an incredible claim, or it's simply not good news at all. And the disciples, they hear this news. They hear the news from the ladies, the two Marys who go and tell them the good news, and then they see Jesus for themselves. And I love it in Matthew 28, verse 17, actually. If you go forward a few verses, verse 17, where is it? It says, here we go, when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some were doubtful. I love that the Bible records that. Some had doubts. They weren't idiots. They were like, people don't get raised from the dead normally. This doesn't normally happen. Jesus was crucified, he was dead, and he was buried. And they had some doubts going through their minds. Well, hang on, can we believe this? I love it that it's recorded like that. It doesn't record the disciples as these kind of perfect super spiritual heroes who kind of go, of course Jesus is raised from the dead. We know the Old Testament. No, some doubted. It's okay to have these kinds of questions. But their world got turned upside down by the resurrection. There's no doubt about it. We've got to be able to explain the existence of the church, of these Jewish men and women who start worshiping Jesus as God. It wouldn't have happened. Jesus said himself, don't worship anyone except God and God only. And yet here they are worshiping Jesus, and Jesus is not telling them to stop. Their worlds are turned upside down, and then Jesus, in the famous, well-known verse at the end of Matthew's Gospel, 28 verse 20, says, go into all the earth, therefore, now make disciples. And as they do that, they go and share this message of the resurrection of Jesus and all that flows out from that message. People, imagine like a magnet, but in the shape of a ball. And that magnet is Jesus, the message of Jesus, everything he said and done. And people are like these balls that get drawn into the sphere. The power of that magnet draws them in, and one gets stuck in 2, 3, and the 12, and then hundreds, and then thousands. And local churches then get established as Jesus draws people in. And like a magnet, these communities get built around the person of Jesus all over the world, repeated again and again and again in every country, in every nation, down through history, and it is still going today. And that's why we exist as a local church, to go into all the world, to make disciples. Marcus has had that pull-up banner next to him. Make disciples of Jesus who gather in friendship and family. Go, grow in character and gifting. Go in mission and service. This is why we exist. To go locally, to neighbors, to nations. What we've seen and what we've heard. We talk about Jesus. We tell others what we know about Jesus, what he's done in our lives. And yes, we can't force anyone to become a Christian. You don't go shoving it down people's throats. You go with wonder in the way Jesus came, with love and compassion. Yes, telling, but also just trusting that it's the work of God in other people's lives. So we go locally. In Matthew 28, if you know those verses there at the end, it's go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, then the ends of the earth. There's ever-increasing circles of the gospel. And local churches need to be involved in this kind of global mission outside of their city or town or village, wherever they find themselves. And so yesterday, it was great to gather online with, 200 other people were there from across Norfolk, looking at this vision to start 20 churches over the next sort of 20 years in this region. But it's beyond that as well. If you want to know more about relational mission, the family of churches that we're part of, really encourage you to have a read of Mike Betts' book. I know I'm recommending a lot of books, but this one, Relational Mission, Mike Betts, A Way of Life. This really encapsulates the heart and the values of who we are as a church and what it means to be part of a church movement and a church family as we sort of start churches. And Friday night, like Marcus said, it was really great on our City Centre prayer meeting to have James and Jess, who were here at City Centre, sent out to Beccles to help the church down there, and have our friends Phil and Emma from Stockholm online and pray for them. We're part of something bigger. We're part of something that is global. That's why we exist, to make disciples who gather, grow, and go. But I just want to end on this, really, the people God uses for mission. Because you may think, well, I don't know what I've got to contribute. You may think, even in this season of lockdown and everything that's kind of going on, and what do I got? What can I do to contribute to this? Well, you see, God isn't looking for people with incredible CVs. I came across my old CV. It's about the only one I've written, I think, in my entire life, and it's going right back. The last bit on it is from 1994. And I was looking at this, and I was thinking, well, look at my qualifications and other things. It's not really all that impressive. Whereas for Google and Coca-Cola, I imagine if I was to apply for a job there, they're probably looking for the cream of the crop. They're looking for the best of the best. But Jesus doesn't seem to do it that way. Jesus takes ordinary men and women, Mary Magdalene, who'd experienced God's amazing grace, who's had their worlds turned upside down, weak men and women, people who don't think they've got it all together or can contribute or all the rest of it. Just look at the 12 disciples that Jesus chose. He didn't follow the pattern of the rabbis who choose the best of the best and the most educated. No, he takes a ragtag bunch of people and he says, right, now through you, there's going to be this incredible mission to the whole world. And it's happened, and it's happening through ordinary people, weak, flawed people who have been blown away by God's amazing grace. I love it even when later on here that it says in verse 10 says, Jesus says, go and tell my brothers. He doesn't say, go and tell the cowards that ran away. Go and tell those idiots who didn't really understand what I said. He says, go and tell my brothers. It's family. It's what church is. And Jesus wonderfully extends his grace to us, and we extend it to others, but it's very much in weakness. In fact, we qualify for this mission, not by having it all together, but by coming to God and saying, we haven't got it all together, and we need your grace, and we need your help. We're utterly dependent on you by the power of your Spirit to work in us together to see this mission fulfilled. I love the way Paul puts it. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. I'm convinced that people should look at the church and think, I've got no idea how this stuff in the world is happening through this bunch of people. It shouldn't be the case, but it is, and it does happen. And so we keep praying for God's grace and to enable us to do what he's called us to do as kings and beyond, and maybe you're watching this from other places or part of another church or whatever. We keep relying on his grace and his power at work in our lives to achieve this mission that he's called us to together. I'm going to invite the band back up, and we're going to hopefully sing a song that maybe helps us to respond in some kind of way. It might be just for yourself, just that sense of God, yeah, use me in the mission. You've got a part to play. Each one of us has a part to play in what God has called us to together. And I'm so grateful as well. We're so grateful as leaders, the way that people through this difficult season of COVID-19, it's not been easy. But the way that people have given themselves to serve one another, to love one another, to keep this mission going in a different shape, different form, and so on. But we want to keep praying for the grace of God to do that. But we're so grateful to you for it. So I'd pray and then I'll hand over to the band. Lord, thank you so much that you ain't after spiritual superstars. You're not after people that have got it all together, that people have their stuff all in line. In fact, your invitation is to come to you when we're weary, when we're tired, when we haven't got it together, when we're messed up, when we've sinned, when we've failed. And we come to you and experience your amazing grace. And then your power, and you turn our world upside down, and then you send us out with that message to say, look, it's in Jesus. He's the foundation. He's got the words of life. It's Jesus. We point to you. And I just pray, keep working in us, giving us the grace to do what you've called us to do through this season together. Amen. Good to be with you. Over to the band now. I'll get out of the way.